Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parent Coach on Call show. I'm Parent Coach Sharoya Ham, and this is the place where overwhelmed parents can come and find relief. Today, I want to talk to you about, along with my special guest, about teenage anxiety. It is certainly on the rise during the pandemic, but it also is just very common part of being an adolescent. So today I want to talk about what you can do if you have a teen who's struggling with anxiety, what you can do, and as well as what you should not do. So I have called upon my special guest, Dr. Laura Anderson. Dr. Laura, would you take a moment and say hi to everyone?
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. And so there's an additional question I want us to address today as well. I have a support group, and there have been parents in my support group who already have taken their teenagers to go get therapy, but they're so reluctant to say anything to the therapist because of confidentiality rules. So today, I want to talk about how you can collaborate with your teen's therapist because it's so important. So let me take a moment and introduce Dr. Anderson, and then after that, I'm going to let you go, Dr. Laura Anderson, and address these two questions so that some parent today can find some relief and gain some skills on how to handle their teenager who's struggling with anxiety. So, Dr. Laura Anderson is a child and teen and family psychologist who has worked in the field with families for over 20 years. She has taken on a unique mission to help children who are struggling with identity issues, whether it's because they're adopted or they're dealing with gender and sexuality questioning, or perhaps they're a third culture kid who just doesn't know quite where they fit in. As an intercultural forever mom in an internationally adoptive family, she knows the intentionality it takes to raise a child who has a healthy identity. And that's what we all aim for. And that's what makes Dr. Laura Anderson so special, and why I invited her, because she understands the value of being intentional about what we say, what we do to build up our child's confidence, not in what they do, but in who they are. So Dr. Laura, take it from here and help us figure out what we should and should not do for our teens who are struggling with anxiety right now.
Sure, that's a great place to start, Shoria, and that makes sense to talk about what anxiety looks like a sort of a snapshot of some things that are kind of sneaky that we don't think about when we hear the word anxiety, but what actually are some red flags to notice. And then what do we know about when it's time to get some help? And I really appreciate your additional piece about once you're approaching help, how do you vet people? What should you know about how confidentiality works if you're seeking therapy with your teen? So one of the things I talk about a lot with anxiety is, as I said, it's kind of sneaky. A lot of the times we think of anxiety as a child who's very timid, who is, obviously biting nails and worried and afraid, like visibly afraid of things. And that is a way that anxiety shows up. But another way that anxiety shows up is in sort of bossy, cranky, kind of controlling, like rigid, has to have things a certain way, and kind of freaks out if schedules change. Anxiety can also look like outbursts of frustration and tears. And now I know there may be several parents out here that are like, wait though, that's adolescence. The ups and downs and the big feelings. And so when I'm assessing for anxiety, what I look for is patterns of those, right? I will look for, definitely, I'll look for, there are some who are very timid, who won't speak up for themselves, who are feeling overwhelmed and don't know how to ask for help from school. So they start avoiding. Avoidance is a very common coping strategy for anxiety. So I'll check out if that's happening. I will then also look for argumentative, irritable, again, sort of perfectionism, competitivism. Those things are often indicators of an underlying anxiety. Panic attacks are an indicator of anxiety. Really restricting food or binge eating, those can also be like habit behaviors that suggest anxiety. Partying pretty hard, using substances to check out can absolutely be, like, I definitely hear a lot of teenagers talk about taking the edge off. Well, what does it do for? Well, it takes the edge off. It keeps my mind off things, and it takes the edge off this rev. We're asking a lot of teens these days, and there are a lot of demands on their attention. They're getting a lot of stimulation. Screen time, leads to anxiety in terms of social comparisons, exclusion. So I'll assess for some of those things when I'm trying to check out what's happening with a young person. And I will also look for like nervous habits, picking at skin, biting nails, pulling hair, and no one of those by themselves really necessarily slams down the label of an official anxiety diagnosis, but they tend to come in clusters. And if I see a real theme running through, or several of those that the young person and the parent are like, oh yeah, no, my mind never rests and I'm always keyed up, then that's an indicator. So a cluster of several of those different types of symptoms gives me a big indicator. And equally importantly, when parents say, well, how do I know when to try to seek help, is when it's really starting to interfere with the daily activities a child is supposed to be, in which they're supposed to be engaged. Is their sleep completely out of whack? Have they started distancing themselves from friendships that used to be successful and easy? Or are they having difficulty engaging with others in a way that keeps friendships flowing? Is the school concerned they're not able to focus or follow through? Are they doing work over and over and over again because the perfectionism is just so rampant that they're overcorrecting and driving themselves into exhaustion through perfectionism? So you're looking at, is it impairing sleep, eating, health, friendships, school performance, or is it really impacting family relationships too, right? Sometimes kids, there's another subset of kids who keep it together in the structure of school, and they try hard to perform, they work really hard to get things right. They like the repetition and the routines and what's expected of them, but they're exhausted from trying to juggle all the social stuff and the academic stuff, and they come home and it's as if a grenade went off in the house. It's just messy and unraveled and moody, and like, it can be intense. So sometimes we're looking for, maybe the school indicators aren't off the charts, but something isn't flowing in the family because of it. So
Dr. Laura, I want to just pause for just a second and pull out something. All of it is important, but I want parents to take a note of what you said. Patterns are so important. Mm-hmm. So if parents can take some time to jot down what they're seeing and what they're seeing on a regular basis, and perhaps paying attention to when it's happening. So when the child is doing homework, do you not see it for the rest of the day? Like you said, do you only see it during the week when they had intense days at school and come home and drop everything? So I love that you said that. And it's even helpful, tell me if you agree, for you, the psychologist, for a parent to come in and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I've jotted down.
Incredibly helpful. And in fact, and it's a great way to be able to communicate. We look at exactly that, times of day that are a problem, seasons, times of the month, times of beginning in the morning, they do fine, and by afternoon, they're really off. Like, it can be really helpful to understand the ebb and flow of what you're seeing with the agitation or the fears or the nervousness? Like, when are you really aware as a parent that this is disruptive for your child in some way? Who is around? Who have they just finished visiting? Who did they hang out with? Like, what do you notice in terms of when your child is at their most dysregulated? I mean, that's a great word that just sort of encounters, like, that sort of encapsulates agitated, cranky, nervous, worried, just not themselves. So yeah, that it can be a huge tool to bring into a therapist or psychologist, for sure.
So they can write things down and take observations. Now, one of the things I noticed where parents really struggle is, what should they say and what should they not say to a teen who's escalating? Their emotions are escalating. What should they do? Because when you're a parent and you feel like you cannot help, it's heartbreaking. So what do you suggest for parents?
I think that's a great question. And while there's some variability among children, I think as a general rule, one quick thought is to try really hard to stay regulated yourself, right? It can be really hard. If you are in the presence of somebody who is activated and full on fight or flight, sobbing because they're so worried about school, like that parent instinct to come in and fix it, that parent instinct to keep your child from feeling pain, kicks in. And when that doesn't work for us is when we want them to stop it, right? Like the parent desire is it for it to go away for them. That's human and real. The challenge is when we come in and we think what will make us all feel better is if they just calm down. 2 words to never say to any anxious person are calm down. And we think
awesome parents. Please make note of this. But why? Why is calm down not sufficient?
Usually what it evokes is a defiance. Like, if I could, I would have already, you know what I mean? And it sort of suggests to the person feeling uncomfortable that the one in the room with them is getting uncomfortable, is getting anxious themselves, right? Usually it's not like, calm down. It's like, listen, you need to calm down. It is, there's that energy that comes in that suggests, your behavior is a problem right now. Your feelings are a problem right now for me and you. And so you need to get a grip, right? And so that directive very often has the opposite effect of agitating a child who, again, feels like, well, if I knew how to do that, don't you think I would have? And it also creates a power struggle. Calm down. No, no, I won't, sort of a thing. And so, yeah, calm down. And I think about it, even if you think about it in your own relationships, if you have a significant other and you're stressed out about something that's happening, or you're communicating some feedback to your partner and they're like, oh, calm down. I mean, very few people say, oh, you're right. I am a little bit off my game. I think I will take some deep breaths and come to you very calmly to make my request. Like, we don't respond that way to our spouses or our partners either, right? So calm down. I think, yeah.
Great. So we have take notes and refrain from saying calm down. One of the things I also think that parents feel like it's just a mental, rational thing that they can kind of help their child walk out of. But what they don't recognize is the physiological thing that's happening, the nerves, the stomach ache, all of the reactions. And also it can bring shame, like you said, in terms of, if I knew how to stop this, I would. And the fact that I don't know how is bothering me.
Right.
And so I love that you said to try to understand that in terms of when you're in a argument or you're feeling furious about something, do you actually want to act that way? So you definitely don't want someone to say calm down. So I love that tip. So now that they shouldn't say calm down, what should they say?
Right. And the other point, I think, to that, to your point, and then I will definitely get to something to say, is when we try to rationalize with our kids, like, I'm going to fail. Oh, no, sweetie, you're not. When you find yourself trying to verbally problem solve what the child is, well, just tell Miss Johnson you'll get it in. that when they're in that agitated fight or flight spot and you go in, you jump in. What I tell parents is don't jump into the spin. Don't. Anxiety is like a hamster wheel and it's running and their body's amped up and their mind's working quickly. And if you leap in with them to be like, well, try this. Have you tried that? Well, you ought to do this. Well, last time you did that. They're not there when they're that agitated, their frontal lobe where they can think and reason and plan is offline. You're getting full on emotion. So resist the temptation to give them solutions. And what you want to do is actually just gently sort of ask, like, I can see you're upset. What do you need? Can I get you some water? Like, I start thinking about like sensory soothers a little bit. Like, do you want to just kind of take a break on the couch? Can I get you some cold water? Would it help to go, for a walk? Could we sit out on the, porch or whatever, like get some cool air? And some kind of a way to just say, I see that you're upset. I would love to know what is helpful. And the suggestion is also like, let's all kind of just come back online here, right? Let's just take a minute. Let's get some food. Let's get some water. Let's get some fresh air, and we'll regroup when we're both just sort of feeling balanced again. And it can be kind of tricky because sometimes kids will pull, when you say, well, what can I do? They'll be like, well, tell the principal, or you tell this, or tell dad that I don't want you, they will give you a solution, and you just have to be like, yep, nope, I'm hearing, I understand that. All right, well, we can consider that, right? You're just sort of catching and holding things and saying like, let's move, let's cool down. Let's just you just kind of want to bring the temperature down in the room by suggesting things that tend to be kind of soothing for your child, with the agreement that you'll come back together. Yeah.
I love what you said in terms of dealing with the sensory. So even if they're too riled up and you're kind of tentative of saying something, you can just bring in the water, set it next to them, or whatever the juice is. They see your actions are saying, I care, but I don't want to step in there and rile you up. It's a sweet gesture. Even turning on maybe some music that they like. We think probably some classical music, but no, go to their radio station and turn it on just softly, and maybe it might bring them down. So I love those pointers that you're giving. Go ahead. It looks like you want to give us another
fuzzy blanket. I mean, like nowadays, like I crack up when I want like preteens and or like, grabbing every fuzzy big blanket they can get hold of and doing like, there's just something about having what's soothing, and food too, right? I mean, like we did a while back, I did surveys with a bunch of freshmen and sophomores at an international school that I was working at, and we were looking at like, what do you wish your parents knew about what you need, and basically the takeaway from all of the surveys was, feed me at all, no matter what else, feed me and leave me alone until I need you not to leave me alone, and then don't leave me alone. So
the message is very confusing, but if you offer it in the environment, then they will eventually choose one. So I think, like you said, it's just so important to think about that environment. When they start to calm down, put yourself in the environment, somewhere close by them. Maybe not too close, but in a chair.
It's like you're waiting it out. I mean, that's what I say. You're basically like, I'm sorry, sorry, that sounds upsetting, or that sounds confusing, or that sounds really frustrating. Like actually joining with them. Like those are the best reflective things you can say in the moment. Like, wow, that does sound frustrating, or oh, that's a lot. Like because what happens is then there's nothing for them to fight with. Yeah, you're right. That's a lot. You just, in fact, what often happens for folks when you say, wow, that's a lot. I don't know how you dealt with all that today. It's very human for kids in that point to be like, oh, well, I mean, it wasn't that bad. I mean, I walked to lunch with, Fred, and he and I, so they already start telling you that it wasn't bad. So there's a reflecting, there's a calm, what do you need? And then just saying, I'm sorry you're upset. I can see you're upset. That does sound frustrating. That must have been hard. And just sort of listen and plant those in. But any message that they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling, and that you have the solution that will take that feeling away, those are the two cardinal errors.
Awesome.
Yep.
And there was one other thing you mentioned, and I want to pull that out, is that you said, ask them what they need. And then the response is so important, right? So if they say that they need you to go and talk to dad, you say, okay, that's possible. Let's figure out what to say when you calm down.
Yep.
I always try to tell parents, certain times you want to lead with a yes, but it could be a delayed yes. Yeah, that's possible. That's all they want to hear is that there's no fight. You agree that something needs to be done. And so I love that you pinpointed that. All right, now let's move on to the next question at hand. Is you have a parent who says, I think I need to take my child to a therapist, but they don't even want to go because they're like, no, this is my child. I want to know what they're talking about, or at least how to help them at home, and they feel like there's going to be a struggle. What do you say to that parent?
Yeah, and I think, I often hear too, people have coffee table nightmare stories of friends who then never heard anything from them, or the therapist said this, or and so I acknowledge that it is a leap of faith in some ways, and a risk to take in terms of opening up a family system and inviting people to come on in and to sit with you. I think some really concrete recommendations are, I always recommend that parents vet. I absolutely say you reach out and you say to somebody, do you offer 20 to 30 minute consultation so we can make sure this is a good fit? Because there's two things you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who has the expertise that you need. And if somebody tells you they're an expert in everything, that's a problem. So you're looking for somebody who has the expertise. In this case, we're talking about anxiety. Like, how much do you work with a lot of folks with anxiety? How long have you been working with folks with anxiety? And then the second piece is there a nice energy match? Do you feel heard? Do you feel as if this person is somebody both you and your teen may feel comfortable talking to? So when I have my initial meeting, so that's the first thought, is to reach out and ask for a consult. And if a good therapist or mental health professional will see that as an awesome sign that you are invested in making sure you get quality care for your family. And if they balk at it and they don't do those, that's good data for you to have, because it should actually be that the therapist trusts themselves and their knowledge and wants it to be a good fit too, and is happy to support you in a quick meet and greet to make sure it's a good fit. Next thought is, I always review confidentiality with both the parent and child in that first meeting. What I tell people is, it's awesome if you can all be there, because I want you to hear how I work. And here's how I work with confidentiality. We're mandated reporters. So if we know that your child, and this is, I'm saying in front of parent and child, if I know that your child is a danger to themselves or a danger to others, or if somebody is harming them actively and I know that, there is no confidentiality. I must break confidentiality to communicate with you as the parents or other adults in the protective system, right? I have no choice. Beyond that, what your child and I talk about in session stays between us. And because I'm a family therapist and I've done this for a while, I know kids aren't in isolation. They're part of a system. Parents want to help. There's things parents can do that will help the situation. So when I know, based on my experience, that there are themes coming up from the child, that maybe the way sibling stuff happens in the house is part of the stress, or the school thing is part of the stress, I'm going to work with your child to figure out how to get you that information. So we will be having conversations about, like, all right, this is something your parents really need to know, because I think they'll be able to help. So are you going to tell them? Am I going to tell them? Are we going to tell them together? Do you want me to lead the conversation and then you'll follow up? So that way parents are like, Okay, so when there is something that I'll need to know, you two are going to strategize. I always, when I let them know, I work in parent sessions as part of my work. I'll do a couple with the kid and then automatically. So it's sort of like, here's the template for what we're going to do. You will be included because it's your child and because you need to. So I lay out that groundwork for folks, and people have been pretty responsive to understanding that. And I let parents know they can tell me anything, anytime. Like, they leave me voicemails, drop me an email, they can spill guts. And it's helpful for me when they want information from me. Then it's a balance of speaking sort of clinically about what's important to know, and making sure that their child feels like we have an agreement about what's going to be said, so that they know I will protect their confidentiality unless it is something that is really important in the family system. And everybody knows like what that is. Sometimes newer therapists worry and parents worry, well, if you tell my kid you have to tell me that stuff, or you're going to tell me that, they just won't talk to you the same way. In my experience, if you have a good relationship, you still get to those places. And if you don't lay out the groundwork ahead of time, then you've ruptured trust when you do have to talk to parents about what's going on. And when there is a risk, and they need to know that their child's crossed the line from experimenting with things to maybe developing a dependence on them, for instance, or something, right? Like, there are things that parents really need to know. So I don't know if that captures for you.
Well, Dr. Lar, I want to be really specific if you can help the parent nail down the question. So I love the fact that you said, if the child is having issues at home, what your first technique is going to be is empower that kid to go home and speak to whoever it is, and develop a plan to resolve the issue. So how does a parent know that you're going to do that? What questions should they ask the therapist to know that their strategy is to go and talk to the kid and encourage the kid to talk to them?
Right. And I think, and part of that too, I will say, is also cultural. I don't claim to have all the ins and outs of how all the world's cultures work, but there are some conversations with parents as I'm getting a background history where I will talk a little bit about, like, how is conflict resolved in your family? How do kids ask for what they need? Because in some circumstances, it isn't necessarily appropriate to have a child go make what feels like a demand on a parent, right? And so I will talk to parents about that, like, hey, sometimes, I'm gonna be working on communication between you and your child. There may be times where they make a request of you. If you ever are wondering if this is coming from therapy, because that is something I'm here to tell you this many years later, the number of times my name gets taken in vain in family living room. Well, Dr. Lara said, oh, well, she didn't say, kind of a thing. I'm like, whoa. When anybody leads with that, I'm like, oh, wait, let's make sure we're paraphrasing me correctly. So I do prepare parents for the fact. So sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I love the fact, and I think parents need to understand, they can ask that, like, how do you respect cultural differences? Like, because it's important, like you said, what's the purpose of sending a kid home to say, talk to your parents this way, and this is not a way that they would receive it respectfully.
Right.
So I love that point. How sensitive are you to cultural, I want to make sure you understand our family, our dynamic, how we talk. And so this, along with all the observations you bring, jot that down, that you want to share with the therapist a little bit about your culture and when you would feel offended by something they might say about how you parent.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what is the understanding about, right, how much freedom kids have in our house? I think that, and that's also an interesting thing if we're talking about third culture kids. I know you're not only talking about third culture kids, but depending on where you're living in the world, the amount of freedom that teenagers have is really different. Some of them have drivers, some of them are, like, there's all kinds of layers of, like, whereas if you were, here, back in Kansas, that we're like, driver, what? Like, how you navigate, like, what does freedom look like for your teen? What are your expectations around substance experimentation, around dating, like what's your family culture around these really important hot button issues, so that I can understand how to help be a bridge, right? Like I hear that these are your family values and that this is what's important to you, and I see your child is struggling, and I'm trying to figure out how to be able to have a conversation with you. I mean, sometimes it makes more sense that I lead a conversation that involves some feedback about parenting, right? And then we talk about what that looks like and how to invite the child into that. And so there's nuance to the work.
Exactly. And that's what I want parents to understand, that a very intuitive therapist, well-trained, well-experienced, will know how to pull you in, as you said, and talk in general terms to get the information that you both need to help the child, because that is the goal. And so the last thing I wanted to ask you is that what if a child says, I know you're willing to bring a parent in and have joint sessions or maybe individual sessions. That's what I understood you to say, right? What if a child says, no, I don't want you to do that?
Yeah. And teenagers are great at this, right? I mean, they have definitely navigated that. I think broadly, my approach to that is, I hear you. That speaks volumes to me, right? Then I will have the conversation with the child about what are you afraid will happen if we do? If it goes really poorly, what does that look like? What do you think it'll look like in the room? What do you think will happen out afterwards? Most families put their best foot forward for therapy. I mean, I get it. The door closes or the screen clicks off, and then they're left looking at each other, and I've just launched things in. So like, what does your mind tell you is going to be the bad part about it? And we sort of tease that apart and strategize how to help with that. And then ultimately it becomes, my work to help a young person understand that there's good stuff that'll come for them one way or another if we can include parents somehow. So it becomes a little bit of an issue of, I can hear you that now isn't the time, but you and I are going to be talking about when, because in reality, these are your people, and there's something missing. And so we're going to need to figure out how and when, not if. That's sort of how I look at it.
So Dr. Laura, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to summarize this in terms of the first question, what you should and should not do. So I'm going to start with the should not. Be very sensitive and don't go and try to calm it down.
Right.
What you should do instead is create an environment that is soft without fight. Take the fight out of it, take the back and forth, and just go in and create a soft environment to allow those emotions to come down. All right, then our second, go ahead.
Sorry, and reflect that it's hard. What we accidentally do is try to minimize it, so we can say, that does sound hard. I can see it's frustrating. So you're soothing the environment, and what you're offering them is validation for the feeling, not that they shouldn't be feeling it. Okay.
I love it. Sorry. Thank you for that added part. Now, our second question about how to collaborate with the therapist. I think I heard two things. Write your observations down, go in with that, but also write your if questions. If this happens, how do you handle that? So if there's a session that I can come into, how would you handle that? If my child doesn't want me to come in any sessions, how would you handle that? If there's something you're hearing that I could actually do better, how do you handle that? Does that sound about right?
Yes, and any good therapist will appreciate that you are vested and will not feel defensive about that. They will be able to understand that you're a caring parent and you want what's best for your child, and that you don't, it's a lot to invite somebody into the inner workings of the emotions of your family. And so a good, secure therapist will be able to respond to your questions based on how they work. And then there's clarity up front, so that everybody's not feeling it's gray and nebulous, and that raises anxiety, doesn't help anxiety. So
awesome. Dr. Laura, thank you so much for taking this time to share with parents. I think this is going to be so helpful to parents who are dealing or even just contemplating sending their child to therapy. This, I believe, is going to calm them down, give them some confidence to go in there and say, okay, I won't be on the outside. I will be a part of this process. So great. Now, before we close out, I want to just share with the audience that you're starting a new podcast, and I want you to take a moment to tell us about this venture.
Yeah, I am super excited about it. It's rolling out May 3rd, actually. I have the date all set to go. And it's going to be, broadly, it's going to be a podcast that is for tips and scripts is sort of what I'm talking about. Tips and scripts for parents on and families on roads less traveled is what I'm looking at. So, because a lot of what I do in my office is the what to say when. This is after so many years, parents like, okay, here's the theory of anxiety. Here's what it looks like. They're like, yeah. But what do I say when? And what do I do when? So it'll be a close look at, as you mentioned, identity development. And that is around race, around adoption, around gender identity and sexual orientation, and then third culture kids and the attachment and all the movements and things. So just really looking at families that are on roads that are less traveled and how to offer them really practical, tangible tips and bringing in guests who've been doing this work for a long time. The way I describe it in a nutshell is sort of the intersection of my office couch with my living room couch and what I learned
For parents.
where the theory meets the practice, because sometimes they bump up against each other a little bit. And I had to change how I was practicing when I became a parent on one of these journeys. So I'm super excited about it. So
I'm excited about it. Would love to share some sessions on Embrace Behavior Change parenting page, because what parents need right now, just the little steps they need to take to make progress. All the theory, many parents have read it before, but just applying it at such a time as this can be very difficult. And so I'm so excited that you're going to do it. Looking forward to sharing it. And I also want, so I want to say before closing to those of you who are watching, feel free to post some questions in the comment section. Dr. Laura is a follower of Embrace Behavior Change, so she can pop in and see some of your questions, perhaps respond, or I will gladly respond. Thank you for tuning into the Parent Coach on Call show. If you found this video helpful, please share it with others. And if you happen to be an overwhelmed parent, I invite you to follow me on Facebook at Embrace Behavior Change. If you would like a little extra support from a community that will encourage you and give you some skills and ideas, please join the Embrace Behavior Change Parent Community page, which is a private page on Facebook. I want you to remember that you can create the home environment you want, one behavior change at a time.